Hello everybody, welcome to a new Dominions 5 series I'm starting where I'm going to review every single spell in the entire game, starting with the fire spells. So I want to review every single spell and I'm going to do it by paths of magic. So this is the fire video. Welcome to the fire video. And I'll have timestamps in this video. Basically I'm separating the sections based on the school of magic within the video. So we're looking at Conjuration right now on the screen, and we'll move on to Alteration, Evocation, so on and so forth. But I want to do one video for each path of magic, and then I think I want to do a video for each cross path as well. Importantly, this video is only looking at generic spells. I'm not looking at any national spells. I'm not reviewing those at all. I'm entirely looking at just this is the generic stuff that, if you're a Fire Nation or whatever nation for any path of magic I do in the future, these are your options. These are the things that I think are good. These are the things that I think are bad. And some stuff is kind of in the middle or has situational usages or is just kind of fun. I'm not looking at items or any item related spells necessarily, not like the Ark of the Covenant spell or whatever. Just looking at the generic stuff that everyone can get, and hopefully when I'm done with this entire list of all these spells, I can maybe make a fun to look at tier list where I can compare the 8 paths of magic and then also the multitude of cross paths that exist within the game. So let us begin. We are looking at Conjuration as our first school of magic. I have the spells sort of separated by level here, so I'll just start on the right. This is the first spell within Conjuration that requires fire to cast. Again, just talking about generic spells here. Phoenix Power, and it's a good one. This is a super critical spell that if you have fire access, you absolutely want Conjuration 3 for this spell specifically, if nothing else. It's one of a multitude of spells in Dominions 5 that boosts your path magic temporarily for the duration of one battle. And boosting your path of magic up by even a single point can open up a whole new world of possible magical abilities for casters. So this is why Fire 2 mages are kind of just better than Fire 1 mages, because they can cast this spell innately. Yes, Fire 1 mages can also cast this spell. The way that works is they have to have a fire gem in hand, like when the battle starts, and then they can crush the fire gem, and then they can cast Phoenix Power. But Fire 2 is obviously a strong level to have, because once you have Fire 2, you're basically Fire 3 thanks to Phoenix Power. And that sort of thinking is, it proliferates through all of, at least when I look at a mage, when I'm valuing how strong a mage is, when I see a Fire 2 mage, I just think it's a Fire 3 mage, because specifically this spell exists, because Phoenix Power is such a mandatory thing to have. And probably if you have a fire mage, close to 100% of the time they should be casting Phoenix Power. It just makes all your future fire spells, even if it's not really giving you access to new fire magic, there's so many spells in Dominions 5 that get stronger when you cast them with higher level path magic than what the spell actually calls for. You get some sort of additional benefit, whether that's more damage, reduced fatigue, more summons or something. So Phoenix Power is a great spell. On top of that, it also gives you 5 extra fire resistance, which is cool. There are many fire spells that actually can potentially harm the caster of the spell, so it's good to have some fire resistance built in. Anyway, Phoenix Power, super good. Definitely good. And these two spells are ritual spells, so you do not cast them in battle, you cast them in a laboratory outside of combat. The Flame Jelly is a weird spell. Very strange. You get 10 of these things, or more, that's what the plus on the inspector here refers to. If you had a Fire 3 mage cast this, you would get an extra Flame Jelly. But you'll only pay 6 fire gems, and you get 10 of these things. They each have 25 hit points. That's pretty good. It's not like their stats are incredible, 5 and 5 and 7 strength. But, they're blunt resistant and pierce resistant, and if you're underwater, which these things must be because they're aquatic, you can only cast this spell underwater, they're going to be pretty decently tanky. Couple that with 20 magic resistance. 20 magic resistance. These things are very good at absorbing spells that are like, oh, magic resistance negates, and your opponent is going to spam them en masse. These things have a big chunk of HP, so they'll likely be targeted by such spells, and they're going to pass. 20 magic resistance that's crazy. That's extremely good. In combat, if they actually get, surrounded by marrows or something and they start poking them to death, they're going to die really fast. Even though they do have a heat aura, it's not a very impressive heat aura. Resisting fire underwater is kind of a joke. That doesn't, I believe there's only one fire combat spell that works underwater. Maybe there's more. I guess we'll see in this list. His attack is a interesting thing. It does poison damage, but it's also fire damage. So if you need to do fire damage to your opponent, this will make it happen. It's kind of neat that it's actually it's an area of effect spell, or not spell, intrinsic weapon, as it says. It just sort of attacks in an area, can't be stopped. Yeah, the Flame Jelly, as far as summons go, really not too bad. It's gonna die, but, it's pretty cheap, and you get these early, relatively, Conjuration 4. It's just, the issue is, why do you need fire resistance underwater? How the hell did you even get a fire mage underwater in the first place? I guess your Erythia, whatever that nation's called. And I'm thinking, how do you get a fire mage underwater? I guess they can do it. It's just kind of a really difficult spell to actually cast if you're an underwater nation. Because fire magic is super uncommon. But if you can cast it, these guys have, they got some cool stuff. Fire Shield, 20 MR, you get 10 of them, 6 fire gems. That's a dang good trade, especially if you can give these guys any sort of protection at all. If you're, let's say, really late in the game, can you cast Army of Gold and Army of Lead underwater? I guess I should look that up right now before I go any further. May use underwater. Yes. Okay. Good. So, if you can boost their protection with some sort of protection boosting spell, these guys get even stronger. And they're pretty, relatively tanky, I guess, as it is. Anyway, that's enough about this weird meme spell that probably will never get casted. Fire Drake. Classic fire ritual summon guy. It's a snake. It's got Drake. It's got 28 HP. It's an undisciplined animal, though, so it's just gonna kind of do its own thing in battle, and its morale isn't super great, but it does have this very good weapon, the Drake Fire, so it, shoots out a long, basically cone attack, if you're familiar with, Dungeons and Dragons, in a arc in front of it, so it can hit a massive clump of units. And if you need to do fire damage to a big chunk of units, and you want to have a HP, Drake. It's not tanky at 10 HP. Its fighting stats are bad. It's not really going to kill anything with this bite because it's not likely to hit. But if it does hit, it does have 15 strength. You're making this thing because it's got 28 HP and because it's got Drake Fire. That's why you want this guy. It's a very inefficient use of your mage turns. Like if you compare how many flame jellies you got for 1 mage turn and 6 fire gems, you only get a single of these things in for 1 mage turn. It's okay. I don't think it's that good, and if your opponent has any sort of fire resistance at all, it's going to make Drake Fire substantially worse. I guess I can get into this now. The way fire damage works is, we'll review it on the individual spell card, but it does not, protection still matters, but then also the resistances of the target also factor in. So most fire spells are armor piercing, so they ignore half of protection, but if your opponent has 20 protection, then they're still getting 10 protection from the fire spell. And that can make a lot of fire spells kind of bad. If you couple that with even a moderate amount of fire resistance, we'll say 10, suddenly Drake Fire looks really bad. Like, you're dishing out 6 damage to units that are soaking 15. You're not going to do anything. You're not going to do anything to them at all. Is 20 protection a lot? Yeah, especially in the early age, it is. Is 10 fire resistance a lot? No, not really. It's pretty achievable, at least for Sacreds to easily cross that hurdle. But if your opponent doesn't have that, Drake Fire's pretty good. It'll melt the shit out of indies, that's for sure. I don't really like the unit though, if only because it's just really expensive to make it. Not on gems necessarily, but on mage turns. But if you need summons that are gonna stick around, it's doing a good thing. Okay, so this is also Conjuration 3. The summon lesser fire elemental. So fire elementals in general, all the elementals really, are good. I can just say that, outright right here. No matter what elemental you're summoning, it's a good unit. It doesn't matter if it's the tiny elemental, or it's the medium one, or it's the living fire, living water, living air, whatever version. They're all good. All of them are gonna do work. Are all of them good in 100% of the situations? No. Do you want to be summoning a lesser fire elemental instead of a big-sized fire elemental? No. Not really ever. No. This version of the fire elemental, this smaller one, has 2 other forms that it's going to turn into. Basically, once its HP reaches 0, it becomes the next interval stage of this guy. And you can see as they get smaller, their HP maximum goes down, and their strength also goes down. Their size as well decreases. Magic resistance goes down. Basically, they just get worse. They're going to deal less damage outright. So in total, this guy's got 24 hit points. For something that you just spring up in battle, that's going to do an area of effect 1, 14 damage, armor-piercing fire shot on a square. That's really good against, relatively unprotected humans. And also, these things are ethereal, so they're really hard to hit unless you're attacking them with magic weapons. If you are just using mundane weapons, fire elementals are going to rock, especially if they're fighting humans. Yeah, these things are great. Even though they're a small version, they're not incredible. They can definitely do work against chaff, effectively. That goes for undead as well. Undead can really get annihilated by fire elementals. This is obviously not the version of fire elemental you want to be casting. If you can cast the bigger one, you should. If you need to cast this one, as I said, to like kill chaff, it's fine. You know, it's okay. It's not incredible, but it'll do good work. Considering what you're paying with one fire gem, you know, it's a pretty good investment, I would say. It's also very easy to cast with only fire 1, so you don't actually need to give your troops the ability to cast Phoenix power to your mages, I should say, to cast this, which I guess is a consideration. There is an item in the game to give your units a temporary fire gem that they just hold forever, like one fire gem at the start of every battle forever. Could be worth it to cast this if they're a fire 1 mage instead of casting Phoenix power, because if you cast Phoenix power, they're eating up the gem, and now they can't cast fire elemental at all because it's going to cost them one fire gem. So, you know, it's just things like that that you got to consider. But if you're in a situation where you're deploying your mages to the battlefield, why wouldn't you want to cast the most powerful magic you can, you know? aka normal fire elemental. This is a good spell, don't get me wrong. Okay, so now we're on to Conjuration 5. Here's another ritual spell. The Summer Line, you spend 20 fire gems, you're getting 6, because you get +1 for every half level. I don't know if that's half level over, so I guess you'd have to be fire 5 to get 6. Anyway, you get at least 5 of these things. For 20 fire gems. 20 fire gems, that's a pretty hefty investment. That's a lot of fire gems. What can they do? Well, they got 44 HP, 17 strength, 14 attack skill, 11 defense skill. They are ethereal, but they are a magic being. That can kind of be a problem. Also, most notably, they have summer power 25, which means their stats are going to be better in the summer, and their stats are going to be worse in the winter time. That's just sort of how it goes. They don't have a fire shield, unlike the fire elemental, which is a big boon of the fire elemental. They do have these 2 attacks. They're fine. You know, these attacks they're nothing special. The lion is size 3, so you can fit 2 of them in a square, so you can dish out a total of 4 attacks per square, per round. And I mean, they got 50 morale, so they're not going to retreat. Yeah, I mean, if you just need like tanky, line-holding units that, you know you're fighting enemy units that do not have access to magic damage, these guys are great, you know. You're at Conjuration 5, you gotta cast some, like, ritual spells to get more chaff on the board. You're being targeted by Soul Slay or something, and you need targets to absorb that. Yeah, summon some Summer Lions, why not? They, yeah, I mean, they're alright. They're just, like, it's not really much else to say about this unit. It's okay. For what it is, it's alright. Fire resistance 60 is pretty good. I think the biggest weakness of this thing is that it comes in at Conjuration 5, which is the same time you get Fire Elemental. So, you know, it's like, would you rather spend 20 Fire Gems to get Summer Lions or get 20 Fire Elementals temporarily in one battle? Well, you know, as I said, it's kind of a situational thing. Sometimes you need high HP because high HP units will be targeted by enemy mages first. And in that case, you know, if you want your squishy little humanoid mages to not get owned, then yeah, you know, Summer Lions are great. It's just fire, like, there are better paths of magic that do this same thing for less. You know, 20 fire gems is kind of expensive. I suppose if fire is really the only path of magic you've got, then this is not like a bad option. It's alright. Its attacks aren't anything to write home about. It's not really gonna, like, it's not gonna, like, kill armies or anything. But against mundane attacks, it's pretty survivable. So here we go. Summon Fire Elemental. This is like the lesser version, except even better, because he comes with all of these wounded forms. So, if I separate these correctly, actually I think I'm missing one. Yeah, I'm missing this one. Oh man. There's so yeah, I mean, as you can kind of tell, there's a lot of stages to the big fire elemental. This one is going to dish out way more damage than the small one did. Not just like double, probably closer to like quadruple the amount of damage output that the lesser fire elemental could dish out. It's also got, what is this, an extra 51 hit points if you add up all of the extra versions of the fire elemental you get. So it's really, like 50 HP, that is a lot. That's a lot of hit points. And it's hitting for 20 fire damage in an AoE, plus the random d6 generator behind the scenes. That's good. 14 fire shield? Yeah, I mean, if mundane troops run up to this thing and start hitting it, they're going to die. It's ethereal, so much like the lion, it's hard to hit. Yeah, this is a excellent spell for your Fire 2 mages to be casting in battle. Really great spell. If you have the gems to cast it, you should totally cast Fire Elemental in probably like every battle you possibly can. This spell is so good that it's like if your opponent does not have fire resistance or they don't have magic weapons, you're going to win on the merit of fire elementals alone. It's just, I mean, it's that good. Especially, imagine if you have, I don't know, we'll say 6 Fire 2 mages. You give each of them 2 fire gems. They're going to cast Phoenix powers. That way they can become Fire 3. And then they can cast this spell. And each of them is going to cast Fire Elemental 2 times. You're summoning 12 of these things. Each one has, what is that, like 70 hit points? So you just immediately, in 3 rounds of combat, you outputted, how much is that? Like 800 hit points worth of units? That's a lot of like stuff that your opponent has to like chunk through to actually get to your backline mages, and these things are also going to kill. Like, they're going to smash what comes in their way. Another benefit, I believe it's because they're ethereal, of the fire elemental, and this goes true for, I guess, air elementals too, technically, is that these things can go through walls. So if you are fighting a fort siege, whether you are the defender or the attacker, it can be worth it to place your mages on the north and or south flanks of the battlefield, because the breach in the gap of the fortress walls is always directly in the center of the map. If you have your mages on the sides casting fire elemental, the fire elementals will ignore the big mosh pit in the middle and just go straight through the walls. And if your opponent is not expecting you to cast that spell, you can just get around their entire army and go for their mage line. And then suddenly their entire commander corps, all their logistics in the battle are dead, and you just won. Fire Elemental has a lot of usages. Obviously, like most aspects of fire elementals suck if your opponent has big fire resistance. Now, granted, fire elementals actually just do so much damage, like 20 strength of damage, that even if your opponent has like 10 fire resistance, you're still going to be hurting them. You're still going to be doing damage to them. Even if they have like, 15 protection, you're definitely going to be dealing damage. Probably, not enough to like kill a unit outright unless it's a goblin, but even a moderate amount of fire resistance will not stop these units from dealing damage. It's going to, pretty substantially hinder their abilities, but they're still going to be able to go. And a 14 damage fire shield is very nice. Also, something to note is all of these units have firepower, so in a province with heat 3, they're actually doing 23 damage. Just to like even add on to how good they are already. If it's a very hot province, these guys are going to do super good. They're going to do great work. It's an excellent unit. Summon Fire Elemental is like an S tier spell in the Fire Path. It is one of the spells that kind of defines the school of magic. Will-o'-the-Wisp, I don't know. I mean, I've never seen anyone cast the spell. It comes in at the same point as Fire Elemental. It has the same costs, except it's Fire 1 instead of Fire 3. So if you have Fire 1 mages and you don't want to like do that 2-gem boost thing that I was saying earlier, you can just have them cast this instead. And the Will-o'-Wisp it's okay. You know, the Flame Burst thing, it's 10 armor-piercing magic fire damage. You get 2 of them, they're going to hit the enemy with 20 attack skill. Yeah, they're definitely going to hit the enemy. They're ethereal, so it's going to be hard to hit them back. And with 20 defense skill, in a 1 versus 1, it's going to be like impossible to hit these things. But if they take even a single strike, almost certainly dead. You know, they only have 3 hit points. You get 2 of them. Yeah, I mean, I guess you want to cast this spell if you're trying to be a little, like, more spammy. Like, if you don't want fire elementals, you just have a bunch of Fire 1 mages, but you don't have, like, the gems to boost the mages temporarily for them to cast fire elemental. I don't know. I don't really like this spell very much. I don't think it's very good. Yeah, it's cool. I just I don't think it's not a super great unit. It's just kind of okay. 10 damage isn't very good. Okay, so these are the 2 Conjuration 6 spells. We'll get the good one first. Flame Spirit. This is a excellent mage. So you spend 30 fire gems, which granted is a lot of fire gems, but you get a commander out of it. Not a unit. This is not like a temporary unit or even like a summon chaff unit like we've seen before. This is a mage, a commander, and this is the unit that can, this is the commander that can get you the King of Elemental Fire, which we'll be talking about very shortly. So this guy, let's imagine you're a Fire 1, you have a Death 1 and Fire 1 in your nation. So you can craft this item, the Skull of Flame, that you give to a commander, and it's going to boost that commander up 1 fire level. So let's imagine your highest path of fire is Fire 2. If you are holding the Skull of Fire, you are now Fire 3, which means you can now cast the spell Summon Flame Spirit. You cast this guy, you now have a Fire 3 natively mage. You give the Flame Spirit the fire boosting item. He's now Fire 4. He can craft the other fire boosting item for you, which requires Fire 4, and then he himself can put it on, and now he's Fire 5. If you have a Fire 5 mage, you can cast the King of Elemental Fire. For that alone, this guy is, he's great. Super good. If you need that, this is your in. This is the way to get the King of Elemental Fire if you don't natively have like high fire magic normally. This is how you do it. But on his own merits as just a mage, he's solid. Like, it's alright. 13 fire shield. It's ethereal. Yeah, its protection sucks, but it's a commander, so you can just give him like some nice body armor that's going to keep him protected. He can cast some, pretty devastating, in quotations here. We're talking about fire magic. It can't be that devastating, but he can cast some relatively powerful fire spells. Um, so, yeah, if you want to use him in battle for that sort of thing, this guy's great. He's not going to die to fire magic ever, so if your opponent is using fire magic, he is just effectively immune. 65 fire resistance is, as far as I'm concerned, that's immunity. You're not, it's not, you can't, realistically, you're not going to take fire damage ever. So he can cast some pretty strong fire spells in combat, and if you give him, some amount of fatigue regeneration, he has no encumbrance built in, so he is never going to pass out by just like punching things. So if you make sure to minimize the amount of fatigue he accumulates by casting spells, then this is a super solid combat chassis for like thugging. Yeah, you don't need to give this guy too much. Just kind of like a suit of armor, maybe like, I don't know. I guess you could do the classic like Vine Shield Frostbrand, and you can give him an Amulet of Resilience. But I mean, now you've invested a lot of gems in him, so it's sort of feels a little more dangerous. Especially if this mage is supposed to be like your tech piece into getting to higher fire magic, then you kind of don't want to like piss him away on a one-off battle against some province defense. But that said, he can like beat province defense pretty easily. He doesn't need much, just like one shield, one suit of armor, and he can reliably kill like low levels of PD because he's ethereal. So it's super hard for enemies to hit him, and he's got this fire shield built in, so every time he gets attacked, he's going to be dishing out damage back to the enemy. Great spell. Now, summon fire snakes. You spend a mere 7 fire gems, and you get 5 of these things, or more, depending on your level. And you get this snake. It's undisciplined, it's an animal. Its stats are going to be better in a Heat 3 province, so it's going to have +3 strength, attack, and defense skill in a Heat 3 province. Which, if you're a Fire Nation, you probably are going to have Heat 3, more often than not. Its protection's nothing special. It's a magic being, which is not a good thing. Its fire resistance is strong. It's got poison resistance, which is always nice. Its attacks kind of are like whatever. Like the Venomous Fangs is, it's like it's poison damage. Maybe that's gonna kill something, I guess. It's only 13 attack skill though, so it's not that good. Like the Fire Flare is kind of okay though. Like it's an area of effect, and it just happens. Like you just do 12 damage in a square in front of you. That's all right, I don't think this is better than the Summer Lions, because the Summer Lions are ethereal, so they're gonna live for a lot longer, even though the snakes do have a much stronger attack in the form of the Fire Flare and the poison if you need it. But I think ultimately the unit is just really, really squishy. With 9 protection, it's very dangerous to cast these things and just expect them to stand up to like sacreds, or even like just a cavalry charge. They're probably gonna die. Like their defense skill is not good, their protection is not good. Their HP is high enough that they probably won't die in 2 hits to something. It'll probably take closer to 3 or 4. I mean, if you just want bodies that are going to deal some damage, and your opponent doesn't have fire resistance or poison resistance, then it's not horrible. Sometimes you need chaff, and this is like chaff on demand. And fire gems don't usually get spent on anything that aren't like fire elementals or items. So it's okay. Yeah, I mean it's fine. I probably would not cast it. I had something better to do. But okay, so imagine, fire elementals were good, but what if you could pay 2 gems to instead cast 4 of them at the same time? Well, now that's pretty good. They're not the big versions, they're the size 4 fire elemental versions, so you lose out on size 6 and size 5. That's pretty bad. You know, that's like a substantial, what, maybe 30 HP that you're losing out on. And obviously the the strength that comes with those bigger forms. So that kind of sucks. But, you know, sometimes you just need to, it's more important to put up a wall of ethereal, relatively tanky summons in a battle as soon as possible than it is to trickle out really powerful units one at a time. Like sometimes you need a defensive barrier for your mages immediately because you have no protection, you have no units with your mages, so you just need stuff now. And if you need stuff now and you need, like, yeah, I mean, it's good. Living Fire is a good spell. I think more often than not, you should be casting the normal Fire Elemental spell, if only because this thing's fatigue cost is extremely harsh. Like at 200 fatigue, the guy who's casting the spell, if he doesn't have some sort of fatigue mitigation, he's not going to be able to cast anything else because he's going to be so tired after casting even one usage of Living Fire. He's going to immediately pass out. If he takes any more fatigue damage at this point, he's actually going to hurt himself. So, of course, if you're like a freaking Fire 6 mage or something, then yeah, you can just cast Living Fire and it's like whatever. It's not even a big deal. I think you can do it 2 times back to back. So, and you're getting out actually like 6 Fire Elementals with each cast. So pumping out 12 of them for 4 gems if you're a Fire 6 mage, which is very achievable if you're one of these guys. In that case, hell yeah, Living Fire, super freaking good spell. If you're just kind of like a Fire 4, or even more realistically, a Fire 3 mage that casts Phoenix Power to get to level 4, it's not as good. You know, it's just not really, it's kind of dangerous because you're limiting the tempo of how fast you're going to be able to output more spells after you cast this one. But sometimes you just need to output as much DPS as possible, and this is good in that situation. But sometimes, like, okay, how about I present these 2 situations? You're fighting against an army of skeletons. Now, in one army of skeletons, the skeletons already exist. Like, there's 1,000 skeletons already on the battlefield, ready to go. In that case, Living Fire is probably better, because those skeletons are immediately going to start marching towards your mages, and summoning a single Fire Elemental, while he's going to do work, he just cannot stop the tide of all of the skeletons moving at them that fast. If your opponent is instead a army of, I don't know, 10 Death 2 mages that are each going to be summoning 5 skeletons a turn, you can probably get away with the big Fire Elemental and not Living Fire. Because, like, there just won't be that many skeletons coming at you at, you know, that fast a speed, that if you have an equal number of mages, your elementals will just vastly outperform the skeletons and bulldoze them. Whereas Living Fire, I mean, okay, I guess Living Fire would also be pretty good in that situation too. Look, Living Fire is a good spell. Alright, I like it. I just think I would cast the smaller version if you're like a human, and I would cast this version if you're the King of Elemental Fire. So speaking of, this is the final Conjuration spell. Wow, this is already at like 40 minutes long. I'll be relatively quick with these. I'm not going to detail the art of thugging and super combatant chassis and how those things work, but suffice to say that if you can cast the spell to summon these 2 units onto the board, you're probably going to win the game. Like, if you have the gems to do it, if you have the research to do it, you're probably going to win the game. These things are incredibly powerful tools. Not just, like, for sticking them in combat and they can, like, hit things with their fists. I mean, their Flame Strike is strong. 20 fire damage, or 26 with this guy, 23 with this guy. That's great on its own, but with such high fire magic, they can cast a couple really deadly spells that we'll be looking at. But also on top of that, they have the utility of they can summon allies. So this guy can summon small fire elementals that just stick around permanently. So you get them every turn. You can also obviously have them research. This guy summons magma children. I don't think these are as good as fire elementals, but still good, of course. This guy has Earth 1, so he can actually boost his protection really high up with like Iron Skin, and I think he can cast Temper Flesh, so he's going to make himself even more resistant. Yeah, these, and like they're also really like freaking scary, If you give these guys some regeneration, like they're going to be regenerating crazy in battle. Yeah, they have so many things that you can do with them. You don't just need to give them a Vine Shield and a Frostbrand and say, go attack the 7 PD my opponent put here. Like, these things can make your whole army immune to fire damage. They can start outputting giant AoE fire damage. They can do some like tactical ICBM strikes on enemy provinces that we'll talk about later. These guys are great. Incredible spell. It can only be cast twice in the game. I mean, you can try to cast it a third time. You're just gonna... if the kings are already on the battlefield, you're just gonna get like, oh, nobody answered the call, and you're gonna feel bad because you spent 50 fire gems to get nothing. Anyway, that's Conjuration. Let's look at Alteration now. This is Distill Gold. Sometimes you need gold. If you want to spend fire gems, 1 fire gem to get 15 gold, this is how you do it. It's not the best way to spend fire gems. It's not even the best way to spend fire gems to do this exact effect. But if you need gold, then you need gold. Like if you need mercenaries, if you need troops, and you don't need fire gems, you have fire 1 useless mages, then cast the spell. Yeah, I mean, gems are limited, but, if you're losing a war, you gotta do what you gotta do. So this is not a spell that you should realistically be casting ever if you're in a winning position, but if you're desperate, oh yeah, 100%, you should consider this spell. It's also super easy to cast at Alteration 1. At Alteration 2, you have Resist Cold. It's actually not that good because it only sets your cold resistance to 5. So if your cold resistance is already 5, it's not going to do anything. It really doesn't make you highly resistant to cold. It makes you somewhat resistant. I mean, if you're fighting enemies that are dealing cold damage, then sure, yeah, have your caster cast the spell. It does what it says. It resists cold. Now, Combustion, this is an interesting spell because it actually does a set amount of, or it does a random amount of damage based on the size of the target. So the enemy is actually going to take more damage from this if they're a size 6 creature. I think it is just a d6 for each level of size. So if you're a size 6, then you're taking 66 damage, which is roughly like, I don't know, like 19, 20 points of damage or something. If you're a goblin, it's going to deal like 3 points of damage. If you're a human, it's going to deal like 6. So against a human, is this strong? No, not really. But I mean, like, it's pretty easy to cast. It's pretty easy to spam. It's cheap on the fatigue. Yeah, as it says, it ignores enemy armor, but it just doesn't do very much damage in the first place. And it does add that rain or snow will put the flames out very quickly. It's true, if you're casting this while it's raining or while it's cold, the target is probably not going to take any damage at all. Like, they have a flat 25% chance to just extinguish the flames, and that massively jumps up if it's raining or if you're in a cold province. So in that case, definitely don't cast Combustion. But, against, like, giants, and, you've got a lot of fire 1s, yeah, this is pretty good in that situation because giant armies are generally pretty small. You know, they don't usually have more than like 10, 20 giants because they're just so expensive that if you're spamming out combustion with like 10 mages, you're gonna deal a lot of damage, surprisingly. And even if they have some pretty decent armor, it's not going to do much. Now, keep in mind, if the giants that you're fighting are regenerating blood-bonded giants that are sacreds, this spell, and maybe they have like Berserker as well, then the spell actually kind of sucks because it's going to deal like a small amount of damage that is spread out over every single one of them, and all of their Berserks are going to trigger. So that's not good. You don't want that. But I hope I've described a situation where this spell can have some use. It's definitely not, it's not useless, and it's pretty cheap. So in Alteration 3, you get Immolation, which is a maybe initially kind of confusing spell, because it sort of seems like, oh, the caster is now going to continuously burn with these flames, and it's like a fire shield. It's not a fire shield. It's just a one-time blast around the character. So it's basically a melee spell. It's going to be hard to like script for this sort of thing, but you know, it's kind of like when a mage casts Shocking Grasp and just zaps a guy. This is sort of like that, except it's an area of effect around the caster. It's not a huge amount of damage, but it can totally like annihilate humans, you know, especially if you're casting it multiple times. It's just sort of awkward to cast because it's centered on the caster. So if you don't like position your units, your mages properly, you can like vaporize your own troops. It's just kind of awkward. But if you're surrounded by humans casting, or skeletons casting Immolation, pretty decent, you know, pretty okay. It can deal a lot of damage, and it's not hard to cast. So this is the same thing as Distill Gold, except now you get 20 gold per gems. Same thing applies. This is just better. This is just a much better trade for, you know, at the minimum 20 gold for one fire gem. As it says, you can get every mage level an additional 2 gold. You can totally get use out of this if you need it. Again, I probably would not want to cast this spell unless I'm in a losing war, but you have it. Also, at Alteration 5, you have cold resistance, so this is much better than the prior resist cold, unless you're in like a communion or something. This is going to target a giant 15 AoE block, so you can hit like practically your whole army with this. If you have multiple mages spread out, you can just hit every single one of them and give them all an actual +5 bonus to cold resistance. If you need cold resistance, then you need cold resistance. There's not really anything else to say. In that case, this is good. You know, if you're in fire, you want to cast this. If you're not fighting cold, then obviously don't cast this spell. It's not going to do anything. So Incinerate is, yeah, this is a fun spell. As it mentions in the text, it's one of the few fire spells that can actually be cast underwater. So this is not good against those flame jellies, for example. You don't want to be casting this in that case, but yeah, I mean, it's pretty good. 18 plus damage. It's actually armor negating, which is great. Its range is pretty good. Its main problem is that it's only targeting one specific unit. If that unit doesn't have fire resistance, Incinerate is gonna incinerate them. It's just kind of like it's Alteration 5. I don't know. I just figure if you get to level 5 in a School of Magic and you're looking at fire, probably better just get Conjuration 5. But, you know, if you're underwater, I guess this has that weird usage. I'm just thinking, like, there's a water spell called Frozen Heart that does basically this, but it's water 1. Oh. And obviously it works underwater. Incinerate's fine. You know, it does armor negating fire damage. That could be good if you're fighting like a thug that has no fire resistance. Okay, blindness, alteration 6. Kind of the same thing as incinerate. If you're fighting like a thug that is not going to pass its magic resistance check, then of course burning the guy's eyeballs is good. You're gonna like cripple the unit, and as long as he actually relies on eyesight, blindness is great. Yeah, super good. Of course, as it says, magic resistance negates, so if you don't have high penetration on your mages, or you have no penetration items at all, on your bless, and your opponent actually has like high MR, this will probably fizzle. It'll probably do nothing. But if you have enough, you know, if you have like, I don't know, 10 mages casting blindness on one guy, maybe you'll blind him. You probably will blind him. I think I would never, you know, it's kind of a little specialty spell. Maybe blind is exactly what you need. So at Alteration 7, you get Phoenix Pyre. Now this is a very good spell. This is extremely good. This is kind of like a big reason why if you're going down Alteration and you have fire, this is a spell you want. As it says in the text, it's going to give you limited immortality. If you have a Fire 2 mage cast this, when they die, they come back to life. Now granted, they do get a giant chunk of fatigue, but if you have excellent fatigue mitigation, and the guy who's casting this is, I don't know, encumbrance 0, and so doesn't suffer fatigue from fighting normally, he can very quickly get back to fatigue 0 if he also has big HP and is not... you know, if he's like a king of elemental fire and he's regenerating and he has Phoenix Pyre, then he's probably going to come back to life and, you know, just kind of keep coming back to life over and over again. And every time he dies, he's exploding with 10 armor-piercing fire damage in a, like, stupid, massive area of effect around him. Phoenix Pyre is great. It's a S+ spell. It is one of the defining spells of fire. It is one of the most essential spells for thugging as well. Super great. Excellent. Fantastic spell. Obviously, if you are casting this in your communion, make sure your communion has got freaking fire resistance, so that way when one of your, if one of your mages dies, he doesn't just nuke the entire communicant line and blow up every single one of them, although that would be funny. Just something to be aware of, that you can't cause friendly fire with this. And of course, it's always possible that after you cast Phoenix Pyre, if your unit is not morale 50 or berserking, then they could just retreat off the battlefield. Like if they've taken enough damage to do a morale check and it's like, wow, I just actually died, you could find that your Phoenix Pyre commander is retreating. Even though he probably can't die from the enemy forces, he could just break and run. So that's something else to consider with Phoenix Pyre. It's not like an auto-win button that you just push and will, like, okay, now your unit is invincible and can never die, but it's a tool of a thug, and it's going to enable you to do a lot. So for that reason, it's amazing. Yeah, I don't think there's anything like it, really, that exists in Dominions 5. It's kind of its own thing, and it's cool that Fire has that. Okay, Conflagration, it's the same thing as the Burning spell before, except it's an AoE 1. Not really anything more to say about this. It's fine. It's just like at Alteration 8, if this is not what you want at like late game Magic, you know, it's just kind of weak for a super late game spell. But it does the same thing as, what was it? Was it Incinerate? Immolation? No, what was it called? Oh, Combustion, yeah. So it's the same thing as Combustion, except now you're hitting, like, yeah, 10 area of effect. So if you need to do that, then it's good. It's still good in the situations that I mentioned. It's just not really that good for late game Magic, especially if you're casting this it's very likely your opponent has got some serious fire resistance at that point. Versus at this stage of the game, where it's much harder to get battlefield-wide fire resistance. Speaking of resistances, this is the Warriors of Muspelheim. You make your entire army cold resistant. It's great. Yeah, nothing really to say. If you have like a giant army of stuff and you need cold resistance, this is the best way to hit every single person on the battlefield. Great spell for that. Okay, so now we get to, this is like, now we're talking about fire, like real fire magic, you know, like casting fireball and stuff. Well, let me ruin your fun if you're a new player. Evocation fire magic is trash. Like, it is almost all bad. And a big reason for that is, well, there's basically two reasons. One is that because the way Dominion's 5 battles are all real-time and everything is happening at the same point, and there's actually not like a turn system like there was in the old versions of Dominions. It's more like real-time with pausing, like in a CRPG, where everything's on a cooldown. So generally, when mages cast a spell, they're making a precision check to actually hit the target, to hit the square where the target is. But because targets are always moving, you know, it's like if a target is moving fast enough, they'll just dodge the projectile naturally. Even if like the precision is really high, they can just move out of the way if they're really fast. So a lot of fire spells are sort of, if they're like a single projectile, then it's kind of difficult for them to hit a target reliably, because there, as far as I know, there are no fire spells that have good precision, and if we find one, obviously, I'll point it out. But all of them, like Fireflies, for example, actually has negative precision, so it's going to be even harder to hit that moving target. However, a lot of fire spells try to compensate for this by having a lot of effects. So Fireflies shoots out 6 of these tiny little fire darts, that do basically fuck all. They do 6 damage that is armor piercing. So if your opponent has like 11 protection and no fire resistance, Fireflies will do maybe 1, maybe 0 points of damage. It's horrible. Like, you should, this is a spell that AI casts when they've gone off script and they don't know what to do anymore. It's horrible. It's not a good spell. Very bad. Burning Hands. As it says, it's going to kill anyone in front of him because this is a super duper close range spell. Even though it is a projectile, its range is 1, so the mage is only going to cast this if there's actually a guy like right in front of him and he can immediately hit him with this projectile. And for that, not actually that bad. Like, it's 13 plus damage at Evocation 1. It's just limited by the fact that its range is so bad. Like, you have to be adjacent to the target for Burning Hands to work, which is like, how the hell are you going to script that to make that reliably work? You have to calculate when the enemy forces are going to reach your mages, and then you're going to cast Burning Hands in that case. It's just, no. I mean, when it works, it works. I would never script this spell, though, because it's just too hard to use. And the effect is, it's a good effect, but it's not like that amazing. Fire darts, it's just Fireflies again. It does not, contrary to the description here, it does not shoot out 1,000 effects. It shoots out like 6 or something. It sucks. It's not a good spell. Same thing as Fireflies, even though it does do 10 damage now, which is a lot more substantial, and you're actually going to hurt human troops if you shoot with this. Because you shoot out so many of these darts, if you're shooting into a melee, you're going to hit your own damn units. And this is like a constant problem that all Evocation magic has, but it's very obvious with fire magic because almost all fire spells are either low precision single target projectiles or they're massive shotgun blast spells. You're going to hit your own darn units and you're going to hurt them. So it's like, I don't know, why cast this? Just cast Fire Elemental. Fire Elemental, you know, it might inadvertently kill your own units, but at least it'll kill like 10,000 times more units than the fire darts do. Obviously, this is Evocation 1 versus Conjuration 5, so it's not directly comparable, but the spell sucks. The spell is terrible. Unless magically your opponent has, I don't know, they've cast Bark Skin, so they have fire weakness. They actually don't have fire resistance. It's just fire resistance is such a darn common trait that, like, so many units in Dominions 5 have, that fire darts just kind of suck. You know, and 10 damage is just not good enough. It's not good enough to get over that hurdle. It's not even ignoring armor, it's just armor piercing. Again, Flame Bolt, it's like it's a crummy fireball, 45 range, 2 precision. It doesn't even like hit a square, so you're not even going to be able to kill like 3 humans with this. You're at most killing 1 guy. If you hit, the guy will die, you know, a human will die. If you're targeting like a unit that is completely surrounded by your troops and can't move, then the spell is, you know, all right, you know, they can't get out of the way, so it's just your precision value. In that case, if they have no fire resistance, it's good. If they have fire resistance, it's shitty. It's kind of a ubiquitous thing as we go along here. Fire Blast. Yeah, it's a short-range fireball spell. At least it's area of effect 1, so it's pretty decently, reliably gonna deal damage to enemy units. It's just insanely close range. Like range 7, you gotta be like right in the front lines to actually get this spell off. It does fatigue damage, which is cool. That could matter in some situations if you're trying to like fatigue down a unit. But I mean, it sucks. It's fire damage. If your opponent has fire resistance, it sucks. It's like even worse than Flame Bolt. This one does 22. This one only does 14. Flare. Yeah, I mean, again, like, what am I even to... I'm just repeating myself at this point. It's a pretty long-range spell, granted, but you're gonna hit maybe 3 units, maybe 1, maybe 2. If they have decent protection, you're not gonna kill them. You're gonna hurt them. Maybe you'll kill them if they're really squishy. If they have fire resistance, though, you're doing nothing. It's like it just kind of sucks. You have Fireball. Like, all right, this is the quintessential spell. Let's compare it to Flare. So it actually has worse range, but less fatigue costs. It does less damage. What the hell? It does less damage than Flare? It's the same precision. It's the same area of effect. It's just one single fireball. It's still armor piercing. The fatigue is still armor negating. This thing it's just Flare, but even worse. I mean, it's more spammy because the fatigue cost is pretty low. Like at 20 fatigue, it basically costs you nothing to cast the spell. But you're not going to hit anything with this. And even if you hit something with it, you're not going to kill it. So, like, on the rare chance that you hit an enemy with a fireball, they'll live. And if they have fire resistance, it's probably not even a matter of they'll live. They'll probably take 0 damage. It'll do actually nothing against them. What a trash spell. Also at Evocation 3, though, you get Fires from Afar. So this is not like any of those other spells that we've been looking at Evocation, which were all combat spells. This is a ritual. So you spend 10 gems in your lab, and you snipe like 4 or 5 infantry in a province that can be up to 3 provinces away. If you've got a lot of fire gems, and your opponent has got units that you want to kill, yeah, cast Fires from Afar. It's good. You know? Yeah, as it says, you can harass a besieging force or the defenders of a castle. Solid. I mean, it's a very low level spell, only Evocation 3, but as far as, if you want to dish out fire damage, this bypasses the whole issue a lot of Evocation spells have, which is that they actually have to hit the freaking moving target in battle. This just sort of, like, auto hits a very small amount of units. As it says, the more units present, the greater the chance of hitting a target. I mean, it's basically guaranteed damage if you want to spend 10 fire gems to do that. Probably the best time to cast Fires from Afar is if you're in a defensive war and an opponent is knocking on your doorstep. It's got its uses. Now at Evocation 4, we have these two spells. So you have, they're both a kind of specialty thing. So Fire Cloud, not very good in an open field because an opponent is just going to walk through the Fire Cloud. They're not going to sit in it and keep burning up. But in like a siege, there is always the breach in the wall. So if you cast Fire Cloud, if you understand when an opponent's army is going to be in the gap, if you cast Fire Cloud, it'll target the units in the gap, and it'll remain in that gap, and it'll just keep melting them as more of them keep pouring in. Again, if they have fire resistance, then this does, like, literally nothing. But if they don't, it's a persistent burning effect. It's good if it hits targets. This is like a weird specialty spell. It's like it's Dispel that costs Astral Pearls, but this actually costs Fire Gems, and it only works against the single global enchantment, the Eyes of God. If you've got Fire 4, if you've got 75 Fire Gems, if there's a player who's cast Eye of God, you want to burn his eye sockets out, this is how you do it. It's like a super specific niche spell, but yeah, this is how you do it. It's crazy expensive. It's probably not worth casting unless, like, you, like, don't like the player who cast Eyes of God. I mean, 75 Fire Gems is a lot of freaking Fire Gems, you know? But having total information over the entire world and seeing score graphs is strong. So if you want to burn that away from another player, this is just better than Dispel in that case, because Fire Gems, like, Fire Gems, you're not, what are you spending Fire Gems on? So yeah, you know, it's alright. There's only one spell in Evocation 5, Falling Fires. This is a good fire spell, because it has a very big area of effect that it targets. Its precision is 1, but it's not really a projectile that your mage shoots out of their hands and it, like, flies across the battlefield to hit the target. It just immediately comes down on the spot of where the precision check was made. And because the area of effect is pretty large, even if the enemy, you know, maybe moves away, there's a pretty good chance they're going to get hit by Falling Fires. So as far as reliably hitting the target, Falling Fires is good. It's gonna hit. Is it going to kill them? Is it going to do any damage? Again, you have to think, like, does my opponent have high protection? Does my opponent have high fire resistance? If yes, then no, it'll probably do nothing against them. But if they're like skeletons, you know, Falling Fires, yeah, you know, that could do some work. It is Evocation 5, so it should be a pretty decent spell. And at Evocation 6, you get Flame Eruption. So it's a big shotgun fire spell, 15 projectiles that each do 14 armor-piercing fire damage. I feel like I sound like a broken record here, but if your opponent has no fire resistance and no protection, then yeah, this will melt their army. It'll devastate them. If they have fire resistance, it'll do fuck all. It'll do nothing. It's also, like, super short range, so it's really hard to use this properly. Now, Firestorm at Evocation 7 is a good spell. This is an excellent spell. This is the spell that you want your Kings of Elemental Fire to cast, or even a Flame Spirit if he's boosted in fire, because they're immune to this. This can completely annihilate armies. So 6 armor-piercing fire damage. It's not a lot of fire damage. And a main problem with stuff like Fireball or Falling Fires or whatever is that it's just one instance of fire damage. Firestorm is going to sit on the battlefield like Fire Cloud, and it's going to keep checking the enemy over and over and over again. If your battle goes for 100 rounds, then you're doing like 100, times 6 armor-piercing fire damage in... Okay, I mean, separated by resistances every single time. So even if it's only doing 1 damage, if you do 1 damage for 50 rounds, what the hell's going to survive that? Like not even a giant is going to be able to tolerate that kind of damage output. Firestorm can absolutely annihilate entire armies single-handedly. Now, if they have fire resistance, then it becomes more of a tricky prospect. But they need good fire resistance, frankly. They're going to need, like, maybe even 10 is not enough. Maybe, like, closer to 15 is, like, that's effectively immunity. Because there's always a hidden dice roll on these damage attacks. So even if you have 10 fire resistance, you're probably still going to take some chip damage occasionally from Firestorm. So even in that case, I think Firestorm would still do some work. If you have 15 fire resistance, you're probably fine. But 15 fire resistance is a much bigger ask than 10. 10 fire resistance is pretty damn easy to accomplish. Perhaps the biggest failing of Firestorm is that it's a really late evocation spell. Like, by the time you can cast this, your opponents are going to be able to cast battlefield-wide fire resistance. So, it's more of like it's like a check. Like, did your opponent get fire resistance? If not, then you kill them. If they did, then you gotta use something else. But this is like, imagine if you're playing Magic the Gathering, it's like you're playing a bomb, and your opponent must deal with this right now or else they lose the game, and you're basically forcing them to produce an answer or else they die. So for that alone, Firestorm is great, even though the counter to it is pretty easy. It's still good. Great spell. Now, Pillar of Fire is, it's a good spell. It's only Fire 2. It does 34 fire damage. So now, even with your medium fire resistance and your good protection, you're still going to die in like one shot to this thing. It's an AoE 1, so you can kill a lot of units in one shot. It's 100 range. It can hit like anywhere on the battlefield. You have 20 fire 2s casting this, you're going to like rain down fire on your opponent. Literally. But it's Evocation 8. Air gets a spell like this at like Air or like Evocation 3 or 4 or something like that. Like by the time you're casting Pillar of Fire, your nation probably got destroyed. For what it is, if you want long range howitzer fire, this is good. This is the best thing that you can possibly get in combat. For like spammy, cheap, long-range blast magic, without a doubt, Pillar of Fire, great for that purpose. It just comes in so late in the game that everyone and their mother is going to have fire resistance, and they're going to have really good fire resistance. Against like a thug, this is probably not going to do shit. It's probably not going to do anything. Assuming, your opponent understands that you're a fire nation, you're coming out with fire swinging. But against a horde of skeletons, against a horde of humans, against giants, really anything, Pillar of Fire, it's good. It's just really late. Second Sun, so this is a global enchantment. Costs 80 gems. And it's eating up one of the precious few global slots in the game. So, not super realistic that you're going to be able to hold that global slot position. But if you want heat scales, if you want death scales, then this will do that for you. I mean, thematically, it's really cool. I just kind of struggle to imagine a situation where I want to raise the death scales of my own province. Like, even if the world is entirely at Def 3, it's not going to die that fast, you know? Like, yeah, it'll die, but it's not going to be like, oh yeah, we're on a 1 year clock. If we don't end the game in 1 year, Joe Schmo who casted Second Son is going to win the game. No, that's not how it works. But, I mean, hey, if you need heat scales everywhere in the world, this is how you do it. It's just crazy expensive. I'd probably never cast this spell. Unless you want it. You know, if you want this one weird specific effect, here it is. I think it kind of sucks. It's also, like, impossible to cast because you have to be Fire 8 to cast this, which is like, who the fuck is going to be Fire 8? Not even your Kings of Elemental Fire can do this if you give them 2 fire boosters. They actually need a 3rd booster. Seems really bad. The last 2 spells in Evocation. Flames from the Sky. So it's like Fires from Afar, except this is going to kill like 80 units instead of 3. So yeah, it's insane. This is like the spell that your Kings of Elemental Fire are going to cast, and they're just going to like completely annihilate armies with this spell. It's expensive. 30 fire gems is a lot, but you save them up for this WMD type of tool. It's really good. Very good spell. And finally, the last Evocation spell, Flame Storm at Fire 5. 40 area of effect. 40 projectiles. Range 40 that do 15 armor-piercing fire damage. I mean, it says, like, oh, the Flame Storm is extremely powerful and can annihilate entire armies. That's true. You're right. If the army does not have fire resistance or good protection. But if they do, you know, if the enemy army casts Army of Gold, then this does nothing. Then this is like, welp. Looks like I went down the wrong school of magic. I should not have gone for Evocation 9 because I got Flamestorm, and all I ended up with was a bunch of dead Fire 5 mages. Fuck, Fire 5 mages? So you can't even, like, reliably spam this spell? Fire 5 is a very difficult path level to reach. I mean, is it strong? Yeah. 40, 15-point effects that's good. I don't think it's nearly as good as, like, Firestorm is, though. So, it's like, honestly, Evocation for fire kind of just sucks. There's some good spells in here, for sure. Or even spells that have some sort of, like, strategic utility. Or really niche utility. But overall, if you're going Evocation to, like, cast fireballs at your opponent, you're gonna lose. It's just not good. This is why people think that, like, fire magic is dog shit terrible. It's because the Evocation spells really freaking suck. Like, they're really not good. They're almost a waste of a turn to try and cast. Because they're not gonna hit the target. Even if they hit the target's going to live. It's not going to do a lot of damage to them. If you compare fire magic to air magic in this regard, air magic will hit the target, and it will kill the target. So it's like, unfortunately, fire just gets completely outclassed by air in this respect. Not to say fire is useless in Evocation. There's some stuff that, you know, it can do. But anyway, let's look at Enchantment now. Oh, I don't want to open all these at once. Just do Enchantment 1. It gives you at least 10 fire resistance. And this is at Enchantment 1. Remember all those Evocation spells that were like, man, if only my opponent doesn't have 10 fire resistance. Well, sorry, sir, but literally every Fire 1 caster in the game can give themselves 10 fire resistance. So, it's not, you know, it's not troops. It's not troops. We're not there yet. So, it's only casters. but it's kind of like makes thugs pretty resistant to fire if they don't already have it built in. Now, it's not going to get them over 10, granted, but it's enchantment 1. Like, you get this like turn 0 of the game. At enchantment 3, you get a very good spell for thugs. Now, a lot of fire mages already have like fire shield built in, but hopefully I have shield enough for fire shield at this point, pointing out how strong it is. If you can have a mage cast fire shield, they're gonna, like, that's good. This is one of the thug spells that when people talk about, like, oh, you know, what is good for a thug to have, it's good for them to have fire shield. Fire shield's great. It's going to hurt enemies that try to attack the mage, and if they're not really protected by it, then it's gonna do some work. And especially because it's not like one interval of damage like Fireball is. This is every single time the unit attacks, it's going to get punished with a fire shield. So it's alright. Yeah, for Enchantment 3, can't go wrong with this. Super easy to cast. It's an excellent spell. And Enchantment 4, just really like enchantments hitting it out of the, you know, just one after another, hitting it out of the park. Flaming Arrows, this is, if you have archer units on your nation, you actually want fire in your lineup. You want at least Fire 3 because you want to cast this spell. Fireball and that sort of stuff is kind of limited also because you can't produce that many mages in a game of Dominions 5. You know, you're maybe going to make somewhere between like 100, 200, 300 mages or something, depending on how long the game goes. You can spam out thousands of archers, and if you give all of those archers 8 armor-piercing damage every single time they shoot a projectile in a battle, this is like a triple S plus spell if you have archers. Obviously, if you don't have archers, the spell is useless and won't work for you. But if you can mass out a great horde of them, you absolutely 100% should be casting Flaming Arrows every single time you possibly can. This is like Firestorm in that if you have 70 archers and you tell them to shoot at, like, I don't know, your opponent's enemy range tools, like you're in a late age crossbow war off. If you have Flaming Arrows, if your units are high protection, you are going to slaughter their entire force. Like the extra AP fire damage, maybe it won't do that much. Maybe it only do like an additional like 3 or 4, but that can make the difference between injuring a unit with a default arrow shot and killing them. And this is not just one time. This affects the whole battlefield for the entire duration of the fight. So this is amazing. This is a super good spell. At only Enchantment 4, extremely powerful spell. This is a mainstay. Very good. Enchantment 5, Flame Ward. So giant AoE fire resistance protection. This is the bane of all Evocation enjoyers. Yeah, it's not like changing your fire resistance to 5, it's boosting it by 5. So, yeah, it's, if you are fighting against Abyssia, as it says in the text, because Abyssia is such a hated nation by Illwinter, they literally called out Abyssia for how to, like, beat them in battle, several times. Flame Ward is what you want. It's going to give you fire resistance. This is the spell, for sure. And then we get Heat from Hell. So this is kind of similar to, what was that guy over here? Yeah, it was similar. This is kind of similar to Firestorm in that it's not doing armor-piercing fire damage. It's doing fatigue. It's like a heat aura, except it's affecting the entire battlefield. And that's actually pretty good. It's not as good as Firestorm, but of course, if a unit reaches 200 fatigue and they keep taking more fatigue damage, that fatigue damage is just meat damage, so you can make an entire enemy army pass out from Heat from Hell, and then they just die because it's so hot that they can't survive. Their bodies can't function. So getting this at Enchantment 6, I mean, you've already got some pretty, like, good fire spells up to this point. So, yeah, Heat from Hell's good. Again, if your opponent has fire resistance, you know how it goes. Vapor Flames. So basically, if you are sieging, if your fort is being sieged, if you cast this spell, if the opponent storms the fort, there will be a single row of like 1 square wide, but it covers the whole like top to bottom length of the battlefield of these 10 armor-piercing fire damage squares. Maybe that's important to you. It's not that good. If your opponent has 10 fire resistance, this shit does nothing, and it costs a lot of fire gems to cast. If they don't, then they'll kind of run through it and get burned, and it's going to hit every single enemy on the enemy side of the battlefield, guaranteed, unless they're flying, of course. But it can't really miss, so it's all right. In that case, I mean, it's just a really weird specialty spell that you won't see very common, but when it works, and sometimes your opponent won't expect it. And also at Enchantment 6, because Enchantment 6 is providing a lot of fun stuff, you get Eternal Pyre. This is a S++ spell. You pay 80 fire gems, and you are given 20 fire gems every turn for the remainder of the game. So at a minimum, all you need to do is keep this up for 4 turns to break even, and then every turn after that, you make 20 fire gems. I mean, if you keep this thing up for, like, another, even another 10 turns beyond that, you get 200 fire gems. You'll have so many you won't know what to do with them. It'll be outrageous. This is, one of the best spells in the game. All of the gem generating spells are at the very least good. This is one of the extremely good ones. Its main problem is not really related to Eternal Pyre at all. It's related to the fact that fire magic just kind of has some problems. You'll never be wanting to cast Fire Elemental though, so that's great. In Enchantment 7, you get the Dome of Flaming Death. So this is, I made a video on domes before, but they're kind of a weird subsystem in Dominions 5. This one is not a protection dome, it's a trap dome. So let's say your opponent casts, summon disease horrors in your lab where you have the dome casted. It's possible that the mage who casts that spell is going to die from the 2d20 fire damage. But because rituals all resolve simultaneously, the horror could still be summoned, and the horror could actually kill the mage who enchanted the province with Dome of Flaming Death, and then the dome would go down. But the guy who cast the spell would still be hurt from the trap proccing. I don't know how that works on like a mass scale, if you have like 10 mages casting Soul Slay or a Mind Hunt in a province to kill a mage. But, I mean, you can burn down a lab with this. If you've got the fire gems to spend and you want to protect your labs, it's not, it's not bad. It's going to punish the enemy pretty bad. I mean, 2d20 fire damage? It has the chance to do almost fuck all, like almost nothing, but realistically, it's going to do, close to 19 points of damage if the d20 rolls about like a 10.5 each time. Then that's good. That'll kill a human. That'll kill an old man. So for that reason, Dome of Flaming Death, it has a purpose. If you want to make your forts really unattractive to cast spells in Dome of Flaming Death, it's going to work for you. And then finally, at Enchantment 8, you get Fire Fend. It's another fire resistance spell, except it hits the entire battlefield with +5 fire resistance. Yep. It's another one of these. It's good. Yep, nothing really else to say. It's kind of hard to cast at Fire 4, but it's good. And finally, we're on the last school of magic that involves fire directly, which is Thaumaturgy. Wow, it's almost been 90 minutes. Bonds of Fire. Starting off with a banger right off the bat. So it doesn't say this in the text of the spell, but this is a magic resistance check. This is just like False Fetters, where you're binding a unit in place if they fail the magic resistance check. And then afterwards, they do morale checks, or take the armor negating fire damage to try to break out. The fire damage, that whole morale check part, that shit doesn't really matter. You're casting Bonds of Fire because you want a unit to be locked down in place and be unable to move. This combos really nicely with all those evocation spells that we talked about earlier, because the enemy won't be able to move away. Now, obviously, if the target has pretty good magic resistance, Bonds of Fire isn't going to work at all, and it's only targeting a single person, but against stuff like Van Heers, yeah, this'll, if you spam enough Bonds of Fire, it'll work, probably. And you'll be able to, lock them down, and then you can cast, I don't know, Falling Fires on them or something. I mean, Van Heers are probably a terrible example, because they likely have 10 fire resistance, being sacred elves. Everyone and their mother is going to take 10 fire resistance on those things, but if you need a hard CC spell and you're a Fire Nation, you got this early game. And for what it is, at Fire 1, Thaumaturgy 2, it's alright. It's not super hard to break out of, but I mean, if you're a kind of an MVP target, that is. Thaumaturgy 3, so you get Augury. This is a great spell. There's a lot of these remote site-searching spells where you target a province and you invest gems, and you're basically rolling the dice to see, hey, are there any fire magic sites in this province right now? If there is, then you 100% will, this spell will pay for itself, because you did not use the mage turns to walk your mages out of the fort and investigate all the various regions. I don't find myself using this, but that's probably because I'm not a good player of Dominions 5. If I was a better player, I would probably use Augury more. When this doesn't hit, it feels bad. It feels real bad when nothing happens. There's a lot of collected data online of these magic sites are the most likely to have fire sites in them, or water, or whatever. So if you're, willing to look those up and be like, okay, this is my percentage chance, then maybe you can mitigate your risk. But as far as I'm concerned, the thing you want to do in Dominions 5 is you want to site search every single province that you have, with every single path of magic in the game, at least up to level 3. Augury helps with that, in that your mages don't have to leave the lab. They can just keep pinging provinces, but you can obviously see, that can get kind of expensive, if you just keep dumping 2 fire gems into every single province and you're not actually hitting magic sites in return. It's probably better than walking around, though. Rage. So what this does, if you if you fail the magic resistance check, then the target is going to kill whatever the closest unit to it is. So if you can enrage a thug with Frostbrand, then that's pretty good. If he's surrounded by his own troops, then he's going to start killing them. So in that situation, Rage is good. If there are no enemy units on the battlefield, then this does literally nothing. So in that case, it's trash. But, you can use it underwater. Prison of Fire. So this is Bonds of Fire, except it's a bigger area of effect, as it says in the description. It's just Bonds of Fire, but better. If you need to hit a giant clump of priority units with this, it's going to work out more. The issue is that Bonds of Fire was spammable at 20 fatigue and 1 fire. 30 fatigue, still not too bad, but at Fire 3, this is kind of prohibitively high on path magic. Actually having a 3 in this is If you're a Fire 2 mage, the first thing you're going to do is cast Phoenix Power and then Prison of Fire. So it's not like it's impossible or anything, it's just it's a little more difficult to work out, but it's also just better. Thaumaturgy 5, you get the Pyre of Catharsis. So this is, you cast it on your own character to remove disease from them. But the problem is, if they don't have fire resistance, they could just kill themselves. So just make sure that you have fire resistance before you cast this on your pretender, your old man pretender with 2 globals on him, and you just have him commit suicide and you drop both globals, because that would be really embarrassing. But, you know, if you need to remove disease, then you need to remove disease. Raging Hearts cost 10 fire gems, fire 4, you hit a province, you reduce the population by 5%, and you give them 60 unrest. It's okay. I mean, 60 unrest is gonna, like, reduce the income in the province substantially if you can cast this multiple times in a province and boost the unrest above 100. I think that means you can't recruit in that province if the unrest is over 100. The pop kill part is, like, not good. That means you would have to be willing to spend 200 fire gems and also 20 mage turns to completely delete the population of a province, and your enemy would have to truly be an AI to allow you to cast Raging Hearts on their capital province or whatever 20 times in a row and not do anything about it. Even though it is a random event, it's not like Fire 4 is an easily achievable goal for every nation in the game, so they can probably narrow down who's doing this to them. But even still, like, for 10 gems, it's kind of a shitty effect. It's not really that great. Thaumaturgy 7, you get Purgatory. This is a global enchantment that basically says, hey, if you're undead, you're not allowed to walk into my dominion. Because if you are undead and you walk into my dominion, you will die. Almost certainly. This is like the bane of big skeletal or ghost nations like Urmor. When they, if they try to walk into your territory, this is something that you want your Kings of Elemental Fire to cast, and you want them to stay alive, so that way that this global remains. Because it's like the most oppressive defensive thing that you can cast against undead nations. Super strong in that situation. Obviously a specialty piece, though. Hydrophobia. So at Thaumaturgy 8, you get a maximum precision target that will make the target afflicted with rabies. It's, it's going to hit a lot of units, and it's going to make them fight each other. It's, it's alright. As it says, only living targets can be affected by the disease. It's just like Thaumaturgy 8, and this is the spell you're casting? I don't know. It's okay. Of course, if your target has high magic resistance, this does shit. It does nothing. But anyway, so that is it for Thaumaturgy, and that is it for, I suppose, every single fire spell, like exclusively fire spell in the game. There are many fire spells that involve a cross path, like, what was I thinking of? I think it's Fire Astral. Let's see. Where is it? Is it not Fire Astral? Is it not, maybe it's just Astral. The heck? Can I hit X? Ah, I see. Yeah, this is an Astral spell. Alright. Well, anyway, that is every fire spell in Dominions 5 that is generic. I've been talking for about an hour and 39 minutes. Thank you for sticking with me if you've been watching for this entire video. I hope my input was helpful in determining what you should do in your path forward with your Fire Nation, I think just looking at it from a glance at an overall review, Conjuration is kind of pog. Like Fire Elemental is great. You get the Kings. Alteration's got some good stuff. Phoenix Pyre is probably the most notable thing. Evocation is dog shit, terrible, but it's got some good stuff. It just comes in super duper late. Enchantment has some really great spells that can be essential for your nation to cast. And Thaumaturgy also has some useful stuff, but it's probably more like middling stuff. There are some specialty options that you may want to consider, though. Overall, I think Fire is not a good path of magic, and if your nation has Fire as like their main thing, they probably gotta have something else to back them up, because Fire can do some things, and Fire can do some things pretty good, but it's very easily counterable by any amount of fire resistance. Probably, I mean, yeah, wonder how many times I said the word fire in the making of this video. Probably like 1,000 times. Anyway, thank you for watching.